We may be starting now. So once again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Elisa Morgera. I'm the director of the One Ocean Hub, which is an international research collaboration for sustainable development, where we're researching conditions for inclusive and sustainable governance of the ocean. And we have many colleagues working together across Africa, the South Pacific, and the Caribbean. And in particular, today on the call, we have a number of researchers and co-researchers from South Africa, Namibia, and Ghana, as well as our international partners from the UN Environment Programme and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. So today's event is going to focus on small-scale fishers and ocean well-being, how small-scale fishers are vital partners in enhancing biocultural diversity, human rights, and sustainable livelihoods. Before we start and I introduce the objectives of this roundtable, I would like each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So I'll give the floor first to Tarin.
Thanks so much, Elisa, and hello, everybody. My name is Tarin Pereira. I'm a researcher based in Makanda, South Africa, and I'm part of the One Ocean Hub and working with small-scale fisher leaders in South Africa around networking and relationship building to enhance small-scale fisher participation in ocean decision-making. Thanks, Elisa.
Thank you very much, Tarin. Maybe Jackie, we can go on to you and the two colleagues that are with you, the small-scale fishers leaders from South Africa. Would you be able to introduce yourselves? Maybe not at the moment. So maybe we'll continue with introductions and hopefully get back to Jackie and colleagues in a minute. We also have our colleague Bola from Ghana. Bola, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Bolanle Eriosho. I'm at the Faculty of Law at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, and I'm a researcher working on the implementation of fisheries laws as well as oceans law, and of course, the use of customary law and practices in fisheries governance systems. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Bola. And I see our colleague Sirka from Namibia is also on the call. Sirka, could you introduce yourself, please?
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Sirka from Namibia. I'm a lecturer at the University of Namibia and a researcher on the One Ocean Hub. And my focus really is around RP5, looking at working with the coastal communities to understand their contribution on ocean governance related matters. So I'm happy to be back at the panel. And I think Dr. Farikanda will probably join us shortly because he will also be part of the panel.
Great. Yeah, now we can wait for him and keep going in the meantime. Thanks, Sirka.
Sure.
So I see there may be some issues still for Jackie and Solène. So maybe I'll ask Nicole from FAO to introduce herself.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for having me invited to participate in this webinar. My name is Nicole Franz and I work at the FAO Fisheries Division. Headquarters is in Italy and Rome. And I work primarily on small-scale fisheries, more at the global level, at the policy level. But I also work in support of the implementation of the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries, where we're working with partners all over the world at the global level, at the regional level, and also at the national level, and also with the One Ocean Hub and its members. A pleasure being here.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And Angela from the UN Environment Programme, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, Elisa, and good day to everybody. My name is Angela. I'm a legal officer at the Law Division of the United Nations Environment Programme, headquartered here in Nairobi. My work focuses primarily on human rights and the environment, with a specific work stream on environmental human rights defenders. And great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I see now Jackie and Pilile have their videos on. They're also researchers from South Africa. Could you introduce yourselves and maybe other colleagues that may be with you?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Sundy. I'm a researcher based at the One Ocean Hub research team at the Environmental and Geographical Science Department at the University of Cape Town here in South Africa. It's a real privilege to be with you today. I'm here just supporting two of the small-scale fishers from South Africa that will be participating in the panel. Celine Smith and Norton. I hope they will be able to join in a few minutes and to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pilile, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pilile Mbata from the University of Cape Town. And yeah, thank you for having me today. And I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you so much. So
I think Celine has joined.
Great. Celine, can you hear us and be able to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Celine Smith van Coastal Links, Langebaan here in South Africa.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's great that we can hear you now. Okay, so we'll start this roundtable, first of all, with a presentation by Taryn. While Taryn is based in South Africa, her presentation will be really trying to connect various issues that we have encountered in our research across South Africa, Namibia, and Ghana, but also in our international work, including engagement with FAO on the implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, and including engagement with the UN Environment Programme on environmental human rights defenders. And what we're interested in exploring today are little understood connections between the lives and livelihoods of small-scale fishers and their role and risks as environmental human rights defenders, as well as the needs and opportunities to work with them as partners in the conservation, sustainable use, and restoration of the ocean and marine biodiversity in the face of a changing climate. So with that, Taryn, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Elisa. I'm just going to go to my, here we go, share my screen. Is that now clear on the screen, Elisa?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. And thanks so much to my One Ocean Hub colleagues and Coastal Justice Network colleagues. We've all worked together in putting together our thoughts and our research for this presentation. And yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to represent all of us and the small-scale fisher leaders who we work with this morning. So as Elisa has said, we are really going to be looking today at some of these often overlooked connections between small-scale fishers, their knowledge and their past and present role as custodians and environmental defenders in close relationship with the ocean. And really trying to make the link, sorry, I'm just trying to go to the next slide. Okay, let's see, what am I getting wrong here? Apologies, guys, I'm just struggling to change my slide. I wonder, Senia, I sent you my slideshow. I'm wondering if, because it's not changing for me, I wonder if it's not too much trouble, Senia, if you could share the slide on your screen. Is that okay? Yes, Senia, is that okay? Sorry, everyone. See, Senia's hand is raised. Thanks so much. Thank you, Senia. Would you mind going to the next slide? Perfect. Okay, so just a little bit more about who I am within the One Ocean Hub. So myself and my colleagues, along with partners in small-scale fisher organizations and different environmental justice organizations, have established a sort of a knowledge and learning network in South Africa. And within this network, we've been working to support and take the lead from small-scale fisher leaders in terms of responding to a range of injustices, social, environmental, and economic injustices, which are impacting coastal communities and environments. And it's coming out of that experience and learning, which we are very much, it's an ongoing journey of learning that we are involved in, as well as drawing on the research and the learning that's happening in Ghana, in Namibia, and internationally around the particular role and contribution of small-scale fishers to ocean protection and ocean co-management. Next slide, please, Senia. Thank you. Small-scale fishers and the communities that they are embedded in are part of a sociocultural ecology in relationship with the ocean and marine resources. This is a very special feature and a distinctive characteristic of small-scale fisher communities and their livelihoods. The close interaction between ecological, social, cultural, and economic values with the ocean and marine systems. And so ocean and marine systems form the material basis of artisanal and traditional fishing communities. And in turn, their cultures are shaping these unique ecosystems. This understanding helps us to really appreciate that an ecosystems-based approach to fisheries needs to recognize this distinctive system and needs to recognize these unique characteristics of small-scale, artisanal, traditional fisheries, which sets them apart from other fisheries sectors, such as the industrial fisheries sector. This artwork that I'm sharing here was made by my colleague, Dylan McGarry, who's also part of the One Ocean Hub, and just represents the connection between the various aspects of culture, nature, human, social, spiritual, that we really see in indigenous and local coastal communities from which small-scale fishers emerge, where small-scale fishers live. Can I have the next slide, Senia? Thank you. So this ecosystem-based approach is well established in international law. This recent Convention on Biological Diversity guidance that came out in 2020 speaks very clearly about what we're talking about here. It speaks about the way in which indigenous and local communities depend directly on biodiversity and on its customary sustainable use and management for their livelihoods, resilience, and cultures, and are therefore well placed to efficiently and economically manage ecosystems using the ecosystem approach. It also speaks about the way in which cultural and spiritual values and practices of indigenous and local communities play an important role in the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity and passing this on to the next generation. So in this way, the ecosystem-based approach really highlights the ways in which local communities, in this case, coastal fishing communities, are very well placed to be leading and, at the very least, critical partners in protecting of ocean biodiversity. Thanks, Senia. This is just to highlight that small-scale fishes are already playing a really critical role as custodians of oceanic socio-ecological systems. The stories I'm sharing here come from South Africa, but these kinds of responses to the threats to ocean health by small-scale fishers and their organizations can be seen around the world. Small-scale fishers and their organizations and allies are on the front line of responding to things like ocean pollution, coastal mining, oil and gas, as well as things like human rights violations that take place within protected areas, and the ongoing struggle for recognition in ocean decision-making. I speak here about human rights violations in protected areas. What we really see in South Africa, certainly, but also in other parts of the world, is that the expansion of the sort of conservation estate, which is needed to counterbalance the impacts of the blue economy, such as these, mining and development and industrial fisheries and so on. This expansion of conservation actually, in many cases, is excluding and violating the rights of small-scale fishers to live and fish in their traditional territories of land and ocean. So in this way, we see that small-scale fishers struggling for recognition and inclusion in environmental protection is also an expression of defending their right to be involved in that in the ocean protection, but also very much to not be further excluded and have their rights violated through this so-called act of protection. And we also see small-scale fisher leaders playing a very important role in responding to broader social injustices within their communities, responding to water crises in rural locations, responding to the deepening poverty and hunger that we saw due to COVID-19, responding to drug crises, youth unemployment in their communities. Small-scale fishers, in asserting their right to earn a decent livelihood, are responding and have a vision for their communities that involves responding to all of these connected social and environmental injustices. The picture here is of community activists from the KwaZulu-Natal Subsistence Fishers Forum and the South Durban Community Environment Alliance, raising awareness both of the pollution affecting rivers, as well as the, holding up a banner saying fishers' lives matter and asserting fisher rights, and seeing how these are completely connected, the environmental and the human rights issues affecting fishers. Next slide, please, Senia. Thank you. This photograph comes from Hamburg, a community quite close to where I live here in South Africa, where fisher leaders made the link recently between Human Rights Day, World Water Day, and the COVID pandemic. They are holding posters that read 9 months with no water, where are human rights in the future? Human Rights Day, no water versus COVID-19. And very much making these links between environmental and human rights. And you can see here that although the man standing in the red jacket is Ayanda, he's the chairperson of one of the small-scale fisher cooperatives in Hamburg. But as a fisher leader, he is also responding to these other important human rights issues in his community. Next slide, please. So the obligations to include small-scale fishers in the co-management of ocean resources are very well established in multiple international agreements. So I've spoken about the way in which they are already playing a role and have very important, unique knowledge to contribute. In addition, this is something that at a global scale has been agreed to. So the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, which is globally accepted now as a standard for responsible fisheries management, speaks about ensuring effective participation of fish workers and others in decision-making related to fisheries management. Section 618 recognizes the important contribution of artisanal and traditional fishers and speaks about the fact that states should both protect their rights and ensure preferential access to their traditional fishing grounds. And there are various other global agreements, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, the FAO Tenure Guidelines, the FAO Small-Scale Fisheries Guidelines, all speak to obligations to include small-scale fishers and their communities in the management of marine resources. Thanks, Senia. Next slide. So despite all of this, despite these very good reasons why small-scale fishers should be included, small-scale fishers are either excluded from policy processes entirely. In other words, in some cases, they are not even recognized as a legitimate group within policy or law in certain countries and contexts. Or in other contexts, small-scale fishers are caught in a net of different overlapping and incoherent policies that actually prevent them from giving expression to this important socio-ecological knowledge that's really critical for their resilience as well as for the resilience of the biodiversity that they are in relationship with. This quote from a piece of research by Dr. Norton speaks about that South Africa's fisheries management implementation, despite many people's best intentions, is primarily concerned with regulating the production of commodities and not with the maintenance of ecological or social well-being. This is exacerbated by a lack of awareness on the part of small-scale fisher communities in some cases about their rights to public participation, the complexity of environmental authorization processes, as well as either the lack of awareness or the undermining of these rights to participation by the officials and agencies who are mandated to carry out co-management. And we see time and time again the way that these sort of consultation processes are done in a very minimal sort of tick box fashion that does not lead to any sort of meaningful or effective participation. And what we are seeing exacerbated by the pandemic is the shift to online consultation, which is even further marginalizing small-scale fishers and their communities. Next slide, please, Senia. At the same time, so, you know, as I'm sort of building this picture of the way in which excluding small-scale fishers from decision-making is really a lost opportunity. It undermines the critical role that traditional coastal communities can and do play through their significant local ecological knowledge and intergenerational customary practices. At the same time, these practices and these socio-cultural relations are being eroded. The forces of colonialism in this country, in South Africa, of racist apartheid policy, of global capitalism, and currently the emphasis on the blue economy, all of these forces are really undermining and eroding local systems for customary management of biodiversity at a very alarming rate. Next slide, please. And as I speak about this erosion of the ability to carry out customary protection of biodiversity through these close relations, I wanted to also speak about the fact that in many contexts, small-scale fishers are currently unable to play a role as ocean defenders or custodians or partners because their rights are not even recognized yet. So in different parts of the world and even within countries for different fishing communities, the struggle, the current very, very critical struggle is to even be recognized as an important sector, as an important fishery sector. You know, and some of my colleagues will speak about this within the panel. But just recognizing that fishers and their allies are all at different parts of their journeys towards recognition and emancipation from oppression, and therefore there are different challenges and opportunities to play an active role in ocean protection. And we need to understand the different positions and sort of political moments that different fishers in different contexts are currently within. But certainly in a South African context, we think it's really important to highlight and acknowledge small-scale fishers are recognized in policy, although the policy is currently being implemented extremely slowly and in a very fragmented way, meaning that many small-scale fishers are still being left out, and even if they are recognized, they are not yet able to practice effectively as small-scale fishers as the policy envisions. And yet we think it's really important to acknowledge and highlight the role that small-scale fishers can and do play in ocean protection, both to reframe or to challenge the sort of open up the discourse around the identities of small-scale fishers, both for policymakers to understand that these are critical partners, for those in government who are carrying out management of marine resources to understand small-scale fishers as critical partners, and also to support small-scale fishers themselves to embrace this identity as environmental and human rights defenders, and to really acknowledge and celebrate that work that is happening now and happened in the past. Next slide, please, Senia. So sort of a key message coming from us as the One Ocean Hub is that if the link between the human rights of small-scale and artisanal fishing communities and the health of ocean biodiversity, if this link isn't recognized, and if the socio-ecological interaction is not acknowledged and protected and foregrounded in marine protection, we really risk losing a precious socio-ecological system along the shores of our planet that have very much to teach us as a global community about true sustainability and oceanic well-being. And then for just the final slide, please, Senia. Thank you. We see that there's really important work to be done in building relationships between small-scale fisher groups within countries, across countries, between small-scale fishers and broader civil society, lawyers at multiple scales, ethical business advisors, scientists, and various international allies, both international fish worker organizations and international human rights and environmental rights organizations. And we see that the importance of this cross-scalar learning and relationship building in order that these very, very critical custodians and environmental defenders really be recognized, celebrated, and seen as important partners. Thanks very much, Senia. And I think that's where I'm going to end my presentation, and we can hand over to Elisa and the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks
much,
so much.
Taryn. That was really so clear and poignant, and also you kept perfectly to time. And I think the point you made around how conservation, expectedly sustainable blue economy and ecosystem restoration could be, in theory, opportunities for the lives and livelihoods of small-scale fishers, but actually in real life do present risks and threats and often actual violations of human rights is really important. And on the other hand, all the international recognition of the human rights of small-scale fishers to have access to marine resources and spaces and to markets is really intrinsic to the understanding and the reading of all the conditions for the respect and the recognition of their human rights. And I think I'll start to that point you mentioned at the very end, which is why we're here today, about how different actors can support the recognition of these rights at different scales, and how important it is for many of us to work at the local level, at the national level, but also internationally, really understand how we can connect those opportunities of support and recognition and how we can better work together. And one of the challenges we faced has really been understanding how there can be some form of respectful but direct conversation where small-scale fishers themselves can set the agenda and really articulate what they need and how we can work with them. And so we're really privileged to have two small-scale fishers leaders from South Africa. One, Solène Smith, introduced herself earlier on, but I understand she's also joined by Norton Dowries. So I will invite them to take the floor now and maybe share with us how they have experienced the role of small-scale fishers in actively caring for the ocean today and in the past. And it'd be really great, for us to learn today, and for our colleagues that joined us to hear that directly from you. Solène, are you able to switch on your mic?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ek wil net vra, ek gaan Afrikaans praat. Want ek verneem, daar is iemand wat kan Ek is Solène Smith, die leier hier in Langebaan, coastalingsvissers. Ons is nie net gewone vissers nie, ons is die tradisionele vissers in die Weskus. Gebore vissers, kom al 'n lang pad aan. Ek is 20 jaar gelede het ek aangesluit, toe is die vissers reeds daar, het ek aangesluit. Wat ek kan sê, van hoe hulle respek gehad het vir die waters en hoe hulle het opgeneem het, hulle het respek gehad. Hulle het hulle eie reëls gemaak, want daai tyd, toe was daar nog nie besluitnemers nie. Toe hulle eie besluite neem, het hulle gebruik gemaak van hulle inheemse kennis. Niemand kon mors op die water. Hulle het geweet wanneer om see toe te gaan, wanneer nie. En indien iemand saam see toe gaan het en het nie vis gevang, het die ander vissers ook hulle vis gedeel met die een wie nie vis het nie. En ek kan 'n lang storie heel dag vertel oor hoe vissers respek het vir die waters. Die vissers, ons werk met klein bootjies en ons werk met kee wat niks skade kan doen nie. Ons het ook nou beskou hoe werk kommersiële vissers op die water, wat gebeur alles in ons water. Maar ons klein vissers, die small scale vissers, het nog steeds die respek, hulle mors nie, hulle spreek mense aan, wanneer hulle miskien mors in die water, hulle het baie groot respek. Maar wat plaasvind is dat ons klein vissers word nie in aanmerking geneem. Wat ons sê, word ook nie gehoor nie. Want ek kan vir julle sê dat ons vissers inheemse kennis, het ek lankal met government gepraat en vir hulle gesê, neem die vissers se inheemse kennis in aanmerking, dan sal daar nie baie in besluitneming, dan sal daar nie baie probleme wees. So ook wil ons as klein vissers wil uitmaak van die co-management van die besluitneming mense dat ons deel is van hulle om saam te kan besluit wat gebeur in ons waters. Ons is in Langebaan, ons het die pragtigste lagoon in die hele wêreld, dink ek. En ek is seker as wat ek nou hier sê, ek dink dit is die pragtigste lagoon. Ons kyk na ons waters, maar wat nou plaasvind is onaanvaarbaar. Oil and gas, car power sip is nou, ek was nou in verskeidenheid meeting. Die mense is baie aggressief, hulle neem nie vir ons in aanmerking nie. Maar so seker as wat ek sê hier vandag, gaan car power sip nie kom alvorens hulle nie vir ons in aanmerking geneem het nie. So wat ek wil sê is, daai het ons nou in see gekyk, ons kyk nog steeds na ons oseane, so ons weier car power sip, ons weier oil and gas, ons weier besoedeling, want ons kan sien van ons visse het al verdwyn as gevolg van ontwikkeling wat plaasvind binne in ons waters. En ons het deel uitmaak, ons wil graag deel uitmaak van 'n wêreldwye small scale vissers, dat ons kan saamgesels, want ek sien die ander small scale vissers beleef dieselfde wat ons beleef, en ons het vir jare en jare het ons na ons visbronne gekyk, as ook na die vis. Niemand het gemors nie, niks besoedeling het plaasgevind nie. Nou gebeur alles en dit lyk of ons nie 'n sê het nie. Ek gaan oorgee aan my kollega Norton.
Before Norton introduces Norton.
Hello.
Norton, before you introduce yourself, I wonder if I could please translate what Celine said for the audience.
Okay, no problem, Jackie.
Thanks, Norton. And I think it was quite a lot for people to take in if we leave it till the end. So thank you very much, Celine. So Celine introduced herself. Celine Smith from Langebaan in South Africa. She's part of the real traditional fishing community of Langebaan. She's been involved with the fishers here for over 20 years. And Celine shared with us that the traditional small-scale fishers of Langebaan for years, from time immemorial, have really respected their waters and the lagoon that they where they fish and the water that they've cared for. And they've cared for this waters in different ways, but one of the ways is that they developed their own local customary rules for ensuring that they would, as a group, protect the waters. So they even had a rule that someone mustn't pollute or drop anything in the water, and they would check each other. If someone was found doing this, there would be a way of the group stopping that person. So their local rules played an important part in the way in which they, as small-scale fishers, cared for their waters. And she says that she could spend the day telling us stories of how her local small-scale fishing community really care for their lagoon and the waters in which they fish. They work with small boats. They do minimal damage compared in particular to the large commercial fishing sector. But what she really emphasized, she said, we still have great respect for the sea and for the ocean. And we challenge others if we see that they are not caring for the ocean. But we as small-scale fishers see that we're not taken into consideration. We're often not consulted and our voices are not heard. And for her in particular, she spoke passionately about the importance of their local knowledge. And she said she's often spoken to government about the importance of fishers' local knowledge being taken into consideration in fisheries management. And she's been engaging around this issues of co-management, because she believes if they could decide together and if their local knowledge was included, then there would be great progress. And she believes that her fishing community living adjacent to Langebaan Lagoon, which is their traditional fishing waters, she feels this is the most beautiful lagoon in the world. She says she and the small-scale fishers are very worried about what is happening to their lagoon. They see oil and gas developments, a whole range of developments, particularly government bringing in car power ships into their lagoon. And she said they, as small-scale fishers, are not taken into consideration, and that they are going to use all their powers to stop these unsustainable developments, such as the car power ship, if they're not going to be taken into consideration and their knowledge not considered. And she said, we as small-scale fishers, we've always respected our waters. We've always ensured that we didn't pollute our waters. And they see that this is now happening, and that in fact, small-scale fishers are disappearing. And she knows that worldwide, small-scale fishers are in the same position, and feels very strongly that small-scale fishers should work together, because she can see that they have similar problems and they need to stand together to stop the pollution and these unsustainable developments from happening and impacting upon them. Thank you. Thanks, Norton. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you, Jackie, and good afternoon, everyone, Taryn, and all the people around the country and world. Yeah, but I'm going to talk Afrikaans. Ek dink Celine het al reeds alles gesê wat ons in die verlede vermag het binne in die lagoon. Maar ek wil net by dit wat in die verlede gebeur het en wat nou aan die gang is 'n total no-go. Want sodra wetgewing ingekom het, destyds in die apartheid jare en die jare daarna, toe was dinge vir die vissers baie hektiek. Want destyds kon enige visser wat 'n boot gehad het, kon see toe gaan het en gevang het, hoeveel hy wil, waar hy wil, en daar was geen probleme nie. Daar was nie ietsie soos overfishing en illegal fishing en dis dinge wat deesdae plek vat. My bekommernis is dat van government gekom het aan die woord, het government wette gemaak sonder om ons kennis in ag te neem en sonder om ons discussions te doen. Dinge het gebeur soos die wat ons nou praat van Operation Pakisa, wat equals blue economy. Dan is dit 'n ding wat nou ingekom het, die car power ship. Die car power ship is 'n no-go in Langebaan Lagoon en die Saldanha Bay area, omrede die generators van die car power ship gaan 18 uur per dag loop, en die sound gaan 'n impak hê op die vis en die spesies rondom, en hoeveel square meters dek die sound system nie. En dan is dit nog noisy, wat van die pasgebore babas, want hoekom het gaan noisy wees vir 18 ure. Dan is dit daar, water word uit die oseaan uitgevat om hierdie goed af te koel. En water wat teruggelaat raak, gaan 'n warmtewater, en dit gaan 'n effek hê. Want ons vissers weet, sodra daar 'n verandering in die temperatuur van water kom daar 'n verandering in die vangste van die visboom. Nog 'n ding wat ons in ag neem is climate change. Climate change is there to stay, I believe, as die mense nie 'n plan gaan trou oor die veral wat die COP17. COP17 is nou COP30, I think, ek weet nie. Maar in elk geval, ons het die probleem ook dat die vissers aan boord die trawlers, die mense wat bottom trawling doen. Bottom trawling destroy die hele sea bottom en destroy die value chain or die food chain. En ja, waar ons vang vis met 'n hoek en 'n lyn. 'n Hoek en 'n lyn kan nie die product doen nie. As ons kreef vang, dan vang ons met 'n ringnet en nie soos die kommersiële mense vang met traps nie. So, daai is part van uitroei. Want die trawlers, die mense wat op die trawlers werk, die crew members, hy kom met Joburg uit of hy kom met Free State uit, en hy het nie 'n close connection met die see nie. Ons wat op die klein bootjies ry, Ons het 'n meer close relationship oor die see. Ons kan aanvoel in ons wanneer die see vir ons gaan gee en ons kan aanvoel wanneer die see gaan neem. So dit, onze kennis word nie in ag geneem by wetgewing nie en besluitneming nie. Ons word nie geërken as 'n groep of as ons groep by die departement of by government nie. Hulle pretend deur te sê op papier dat small scale fishes word ge-acknowledged of word ge-recognized, maar in die ware sin van die woord word daar absoluut niks gedoen in daardie saak nie. Ons het al baie stryde gestry deur hulle te sê van wat van ons customary right, wat van ons indigenous knowledge, wat van ons customary fishing grounds. By ons is nou in die lagoon, is die lagoon opgedeel in 3 zones. Alright, zone A is waar die recreationals en die small scale fishes moet deel. Dan is daar 'n zone B waar no motorized vehicles of motorized boats is toegelaat nie. En dan zone C is 'n non-take zone. Ons het government hof toegevat met die erkenning te kry vir waar ons gevis het, ons customary fishing grounds. En ja, die judge het in favor van die small scale fishes besluit, hulle mag daar werk. So dit kos vir ons deesdae om legal advice te kry of legal help te kry om die government te veg. Maar ons dit kan gedoen het as ons rand aan die tafel gesit het. Ja, en dan het ek hier by Nature het ek verstaan dat die carbon footprint van die trawlers in die wêreld, hulle brand meer carbon dan die aeroplane in die lug. So we had to stop somewhere along the line. Moet mense kan in ag neem wat is ons gevoel teenoor die gebeurte binne in ons oseane. Al moet onthou dat ons was hier, ons is die custodians of the sea. Ons was hier voor government in plek gekom het. Toe is ons al hier. Nou, hoe kan mense wat na ons gekom het, kom besluit vir ons, hoe moet ons te werk gaan in ons eie territorie? Ek dink, dit is iets wat moet aangewerk raak. En soos ek kan lees en verstaan en sien en hoor, wat reg rondom die wêreld aangaan, kuswys, is dit, soos Celine gesê het, ons het dieselfde probleme. Oral, enige vissersgemeenskap het dieselfde probleme met legislation en die manier hoe onze governments met ons te werk gaan in vergelijking hoe hulle met die small scale farmers ons het nie 'n resource wat ons kan sê waar ons hulp gaan vandaan kom aan government se kant af. Maar as ons werk veral met die COVID, met die pandemic, het dit bitter moeilik gegaan met ons vissers, want geen markete of buyers wat vis koop mag in jou plek gekom het. So aan die einde van die dag moet ons nou minder vis vang of ons moet die vis vang en net die vis uitdeel wat ons gewoonlik doen aan ons gemeenskappe. As daar vis is, goeie vis is, kry die gemeenskap deel daarvan. So ja, dit is tot dusver my mening omtrent die hele situasie. Maar wat ek ook kan sê teenoor die cow worship is that the Turkish cow power worship is not the Turkish delight. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Norton. Elisa, can I just translate that?
Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Norton. Norton started off by saying that he thinks that Celine has already really said it all, but in fact went on to make some really important points. So thank you, Norton. He made the distinction, he said, between what we were doing in the past and what is now going on, which he said is a no-go when he looks at what's happening now. But if he looks back at what happened with apartheid and what's happened now. In the past, the fishers could go to sea and there wasn't anything like overfishing and illegal fishing. But then government came in with their laws without consulting the fishers and without discussing with them. And what he sees now is really problematic. He mentioned the blue economy policy in South Africa called Operation Pikisa. And in particular, he mentioned the car power ships, which he said is a no-go in Langebaan Lagoon or in Saldanha, which is at the big opening of the lagoon, because these these gas car power ships will be running their generators 18 hours a day. And he says that sound will have an impact on the fish. It will be noisy. And this is going to be a problem. He also cited the example that these car power ships will be drawing in water from the ocean and then warming this water. And he said that we, the small-scale fishers, know that this will have an impact on the fish. He says he feels that it seems as if climate change is here to stay unless people make a change. And he referred to COP17 that he was involved in, but he acknowledged now we're on something like COP30 and we're still waiting for this change. Norton said that if you look at bottom trawlers, they are really destroying the ocean. He said that they have a big impact compared to the hook and line that the fishers use. And he'd read that they impact climate change even more than aeroplanes. And he said, if you look at us as small-scale fishers, when we're catching lobster, we actually use a ring net. And this is causes much less harm than the big commercial traps that really exploit the ocean. He went on to say that if you look at the crews that work on these big trawlers, often they don't have a close connection with the ocean, in contrast to the small-scale fishers who have this very close knowledge and feeling of the ocean because they grew up with it. And yet he says, yet our knowledge is not recognized as fishers, and government is not recognizing us, although they pretend on paper, but in the true sense of the word, they don't recognize us and our indigenous knowledge. And he said, we fought a long struggle. We fought for our recognition of our customary rights, of our indigenous knowledge, of our customary fishing grounds. And he went on to describe the particular struggle in Langebaan Lagoon that they fought, where they've got the lagoon is a protected area. It's been divided into 3 zones. There's zone A, where the small-scale fishers are forced to fish together with the recreationals. Then there's zone B, where there are no motorboats. And then zone C is a complete no-take zone. And he says the small-scale fishers were forced to get legal support and to take government to court to get recognition of their customary fishing grounds. And the court found in favor of them. But even still, they are still struggling, and the struggle sort of continues. And he referred to this, again, this article in Nature and the impact of the carbon footprint. And he said, we have to stop somewhere, and people really must recognize that small-scale fishers are the custodians of the sea. He said, we were here before. How can government and people come in now and tell us what to do in our territory without consulting us? And he said, if he looks around the world, like Selena said, he sees that small-scale fishers have the same problem, and the way in which legislation works and the manner in which government goes about working with small-scale fishers around the world really seems to be problematic. And he referred to COVID in particular and the difficult experiences that small-scale fishers had under COVID. He mentioned small-scale farmers, and there were some differences between small-scale fishers and farmers, but it was very difficult for small-scale fishers to get markets because marketers couldn't come into their communities, they couldn't market their fish. And then at the end of the day, it was very difficult for them. But the one good thing about the small-scale fishers is that they always ensure that their communities do get a portion of their fish. So this helped their community. So he feels that in his understanding, that's what he can really say about the situation with small-scale fishers. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for translating. And thank you so much, Soline and Norton, for taking the time to join today and share this with us. We're very privileged to hear directly from you. And as One Ocean Hub and also with our UN colleagues, we've been thinking about how we can support more of that direct engagement with you at different levels. And as you say, sometimes working with governments is quite hard, and understanding where there can be allies, either at the local level in academia, but also internationally. The role of the UN is one of the things that we're hoping to facilitate. But certainly you have learned a lot as well during the pandemic about virtual engagements and the demands and the challenges it raises for you, but hopefully also some opportunities. So there's much more, I think, that we're trying to capture and learn on this topic. And I would welcome colleagues on the ground and in the call to share also their experiences in the chat in this connection, and also ask more questions in the question and answer section. I would like now to ask a few questions to our colleagues, researchers. I would ask maybe colleagues please to keep to 5 minutes so that we can give the floor to all the experts that are present, and also give that sense that Taryn said of the journey that different fishing communities may be on, and also different countries may be on, to understand the importance of context and different challenges. So with that, I would like to give the floor to Apiwe, who's one of the other researchers in South Africa, together with Pilile, Jackie, and Taryn, and ask her to tell us what she thinks is the evidence that we need to convince governments of the critical role the small-scale fishing communities play as custodians of ocean resources. So Apiwe, welcome. Please introduce yourself. I'm sorry I missed you at the start. And yeah, please give us your views on this point.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Elisa. As Elisa has said, my name is Apiwe Moshani, and I am a PhD student in the UCT One Ocean Hub team. Mostly my research focuses are looking at communities along the coast in relation to blue economy initiatives, and how those are concerning, and the concerns that they raised amongst fisher folks along the coast. So I think the question that Elisa poses is interesting, in that governments are very well aware of the roles that communities play, and they are very well aware of fishing communities as resource users who have the right to access marine resources and have done so for centuries pre-colonization. So I don't think it's necessarily evidence that is needed, because evidence is there, so socially and scientifically. I mean, these communities have illustrated this in the advocacy work that they've done in these rural communities and have led for many years alongside researchers. So it's not convincing that is needed from the governments, but the political will for government to devolve powers, decision-making powers on resource governance to local people, to foster this inclusivity and representation that is often spoken about in these important decision-making processes. So this is what communities call for time and time again. It's what's known, and the lack of representation in things like Operation Pakisa, which Norton brought up, these blue economy initiatives. We can already see that this lack of representation plays itself once again in these expansions. For an example, in KwaZulu-Natal, on the coastal area, we know that communities like Dube right now are completely excluded from any kind of public engagement, any kind of discussions that are leading to operations and initiatives that are expanding the ports, initiatives such as car power ships that we already see are making their way along the coast. So I mean, I think what ultimately adequate inclusion of rural resource users is what's needed, and for the government to not overlook these people as custodians, because their presence is it's quite evident, the work that people in coastal communities put in. These communities have always been ocean defenders, often against harmful decisions that are made by the private sector and by the government. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for you. And I think the point you raise is that even in countries where we have evidence of the existence of access and customary use and approaches, we still maybe need real, not only political will, but maybe as researchers to think of ways in which to show that the development of power and co-management, how it can work respectfully, and equally how we can really have that genuine participation in decision making. So there may be a role there about supporting new, more genuine practices there and documenting them and sharing them with other localities and countries as well. But that's just one, I think, dimension, but you raised really important points I'm sure will resonate with the audience. And I hope that colleagues on the call can ask more questions to Apiwe and her colleagues in the chat. I would like to ask our colleague Bola to reflect on the situation in Ghana and the fishing communities where she and her colleagues at the University of Cape Coast have been working, and particularly asking her what in the research they've conducted have emerged as factors, historical, economic, political, or otherwise, that constrain small-scale fishers for playing a role of ocean defenders, and whether we have been able to identify how these issues can be addressed or overcome. So Bola, we look forward to hearing from you just now.
Thank you, Elisa. Hello again, once again, everyone. So I'd start off by sort of giving a brief history of small-scale fisheries in Ghana, and then I'll highlight some of the current thinking within our research around small-scale fisheries. Now, it's important to know that Ghana has got a long history of small-scale fisheries, which we refer to as artisanal fisheries. And in fact, commercial fisheries by small-scale fishers has been conducted on the coast of Ghana, in the past called Gold Coast, for hundreds of years. And some of the research does, in fact, suggest as far back as the 1400s. So we have got a very long history of fishing along the coast of Ghana. And indeed, Fanti communities who are along the coast are not actually far from where the university is at the moment, have a very strong reputation of innovation in seafaring and fisheries, and that is well known across West Africa as well. And what that means is that there is a very immense knowledge base of traditional knowledge within those communities, which is of course expressed in customs, in norms and practices of those communities. And the distinctive nature of small-scale fisheries, or artisanal fisheries as we call it in Ghana, which is family-centered, related by kinship and affinities, means that there is often an intergenerational transfer of knowledge within those communities. And that's a particularly unique feature of our small-scale fisheries. Now, unfortunately, during the colonial period, as has been alluded to by Taryn within the broader presentation, the established marine tenure regimes, which small-scale fishers had used prior to that for many hundreds of years previously, were disrupted, and the powers of chiefs were usurped and diminished. The effect of that was that the traditional governance systems for fisheries were disempowered, and we had a plural system of governance established with the colonial administration taking an interest in fisheries, and the English courts being co-opted to make decisions on fisheries-related management. Now, in the end, what that resulted in was that Western views of the sea as an unlimited resource, inexhaustible, which at that time was the Western ideology, and the push towards commercialization was sped up in those communities, and the more conservative approach, which many of the communities, and indeed in the case law, we do have evidence of that, expressed concerns about, was took a back seat. And so we ended up with a system in which there was immense focus on the commercialization and commercial development of fisheries. Now, post-independence, the system continued that way, and we had a centralized system of management of fisheries resources, kind of like a top-down approach, and the small-scale fishers on the call had previously alluded to that. So we had a situation in which decisions were made at the central level and expected to diffuse down to all the local communities and all the small-scale fisheries groups. Now, more recently, we have had significant challenges around socio-ecological and economic changes, which indeed has been mentioned in the call. The strive towards a blue economy has meant that there are competing demands on small-scale fisheries livelihoods. So there is oil exploration going on within the same marine space. There are challenges from industrial trawlers and fishers as well, and the nature of investments in fishing generally has meant that small-scale fishers are in a very precarious state. And most importantly, there is declining fish stock within Ghana's waters, and that's a challenge. So as a consequence, in the last few years, there has been a change in thinking, a shift in the thinking around how to manage fisheries in Ghana. And that has been evidenced even from the government's point of view by the recently adopted co-management plan. And crucial to that co-management plan, which only got adopted late last year. So we're in the very early stages. And so back to the point Taryn made about being on a journey, we're at the very start of the journey. But crucial to it, and I think which is what the co-management plan recognizes, is the need to empower this traditional fisheries governance structures. So the chief processors or fish queens for the women, and the chief fishermen for the men, which we have had for many, many years in many of those communities. So empowering them is perhaps a first step towards it. But of course, this is not going to be easy in view of the history, which we have alluded to as well, you know, the diminished role they have been forced into for so long. So empowering them is one step. But we also think that there is an opportunity here for a human rights-based approach. And one of the key things we're seeking to highlight is the need to empower communities of women and youths across it to participate. Now, there is already an existing framework, both constitutional, international law, and national law, which talks about participation, but it's directly focusing those consequences on, or those obligations on the fisheries sector. That's an important thing which we need to do going forward. And also there needs to be access to environmental information. One of the things we've found as we've worked in the field with these communities is the absence of often important information being properly disseminated to them. And of course, there needs to be a stronger focus on human rights education, and most crucially, building of social networks and collaborations between communities and civil society groups. Pockets of that has started to happen. And so in small marine spaces of lagoons and for specific resources, we have started to do that. And we can see from the research how that has improved participation across board for those members of those communities, but it's only pockets and we still have a long way to go. And so those are the kinds of things we hope can, going forward, there must be focus on. And most importantly, I think one thing which we all perhaps agree on is the need to ensure accountability for government, you know, both politically and perhaps through the courts, particularly with all the other competing pressures, and the fact that often small-scale fishers are perhaps not as powerful as some of the other forces out there. There is need for accountability structures to ensure that they can secure their livelihoods, and of course champion the protection of the marine resources, which are very important to their identities and their livelihoods. Now, just a final quick point before I hand it back to Elisa. If you want to know a bit more about the customs, the practices and traditions of these Ghanaian fishing communities, we're also having a special focus on Ghana on the 9th of June as part of our the World Ocean Week. It's on the website, the One Ocean Hub website. And so there we will be looking specifically at canoe culture and the role of what we call ASAFO companies. ASAFO companies are kind of like traditional defenders of fisheries. And so it actually it's quite relevant to the discussion today, and how these community groups use the culture and the tradition, not just as a source of livelihood, but also as protection for their resources. And so I'd invite everyone on the call to also attend on the 9th of June as well. And I'll hand it back to Elisa now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bola. It's really interesting to hear about the different journey that the small-scale fishers in Ghana and the region you're working in are at. And also to hear more from them directly and from the other great members of the team at Cape Coast and the event you mentioned. So we'll put the details of that event in the chat as well for those who are on the call just now that may not have put it in their diaries yet. And I would like now to call on Serka to share her research and experience with small-scale fisheries in Namibia and reflecting on the journey the point at which Namibia is in terms of recognizing small-scale and customary fishers, particularly in the context of certain communities that may have been removed from the coast and maybe even invisible in the eyes of lawmakers and policymakers, and what so far the research carried out by Sirka and other colleagues at the University of Namibia have identified as potential ways for reclaiming ocean rights and participation. So Sirka, I hope you can switch on your mic and take the floor now.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Elisa. I'm just going to get into it. And then when I'm done, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Warikando so that he can just zoom a little bit into the human rights and legislation issues related to small-scale fishes. So in terms of the Namibian context, I think I'll also just give a brief context of our small-scale fishers in Namibia. And then I'm going to highlight some of the challenges that the small-scale fishers are currently experiencing. And then, as I said, lastly, hand over to Dr. Warikando so that he can just speak a little bit more in terms of human rights issues and where we are going in terms of our research. So when it comes to Namibia, Namibia also have a long history of small-scale fishers, and we are still trying to define the concept of small-scale fishers, and we hope to share that at one of the platforms. However, I'm going to focus more on the Toknar community, which is the most dominant historical coastal marginalized community. So the Toknar community are the original inhabitants of the Namibian coast, but due to development, the Toknar community were displaced from the coastal community. And when they were actually displaced, they were displaced to a place that is about 500 kilometers away from the coast. However, they refused to move to that site because of their ancestral history. They believe that their ancestors are buried in the coastal area, and they cannot move away from that because they have to keep the connection with their ancestors, and also more particularly because of the Nara plant, which they highly depend on for their livelihood, which is found only in the Namib desert. So as a result, when they were displaced from the coastal community or coastal areas, they actually relocated to the Namib Naukluft, which is actually part of the desert, and that's about 50 kilometers from the coast. So they are currently illegally settling in the Namib desert along the Koisep River. And the reason why they actually didn't want to move is also because they relied on the coast for their livelihoods. But after the displacement, they no longer have direct benefit from the ocean. The only benefit that they have now is the 10% of the fishing quota that they receive, as well as the 3 tourism concessions that they get from the government. So they do not have any direct benefit, or they rather have minimal direct benefit with the ocean. And of course, Namibia does have laws and legislation on coastal management, but the current legislation impedes on opportunities for sustainable livelihoods of these coastal communities. And one of the challenges that these coastal communities also experience in relation to coastal management and legislations is that it's their lack of involvement in policy and decision-making. So they made it very clear in our interaction with them that they are not engaged or involved in any decision-making in relation to the ocean. And they also highlighted that as much as, yes, there are so many legislation in place, these legislations do not actually favor small-scale farmers. They actually favor the commercial fishers or commercial businesses when it comes to fishing. And of course, that is something that we need to review and also rethink, especially if we want the small scale farmers and the coastal communities to be ocean defenders. And talking about cultural benefits and rituals, of course, the coastal communities did highlight quite a lot how they have previously benefited in terms of cultural beliefs and rituals from the ocean. And they also believe that during their time of interacting with the ocean, they also had cultural beliefs on in ways of protecting the ocean. They, for example, gave one of the examples to say when they were still relying on the ocean, they used to use spears to harvest the fish. But now, of course, the modern way of fishing involves using of fishing nets. So they think that using spears was quite sustainable because it means that few fish were catched, and only a certain size was also catched, unlike now when the modern way of fishing involves using fishing nets, which obviously overfish almost everything. And in terms of the challenges that the communities also experience in relation to the ocean, is that they say as much as, yes, there are some provision being made about benefiting from the ocean, they require, for example, what we call fishing permits for them to be able to access the ocean. And these fishing permits are expensive, so they are not able to afford the fishing permits so that they are able to access the fish. And then they also spoke about challenges around corruption. Of course, I think we have all been reading about some of the corruption cases in relation to the Namibian fishing industry. So they did emphasize quite a lot about the challenge of corruption. And then the strict laws that are already explained as seemingly benefiting more commercial fishers as opposed to benefiting small scale fishers. And then they also say that due to climate change and global warming, the fishing spots have also moved, which means now they have to, for example, move long distances to be able to access the fishing spots. And because of their economic situation, they are not really in the position to be able to travel distances to get to these fishing spots. And sometimes, if at all they manage to travel to these fishing spots, it means they still need to use a little money that they have to afford transport. And then lastly, they also alluded to the issue of lack of knowledge and skills, as well as lack of qualifications and awareness, as one of the greatest challenge in terms of interaction and contributing to the issues of the ocean management. So like I said, I'm not going to get into the legislation issues, but I'm going to give over now to Dr. Warikandwa so that he can just take over and talk about the human rights issues and legislation issues in relation to the Namibian small-scale fishers. So Dr. Warikandwa, please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Seka. I will try to make it very quick so that we don't eat much into the time that we have. So what happened from our side is that in interrogating the legal framework, of course, we have an appreciation that the Constitution normally exists as an overarching instrument to extend to small-scale fisher communities in instances where specific legislation doesn't cover. But it's imperative to note that in the context of Namibia, the main pieces of legislation that we have, that's the Marine Resources Act of 2000, and the Aquaculture Act 18 of 2002, do not make any express reference or mention of small-scale fisher, communities or the sector. And this is one issue that has been primarily highlighted in an interview that we conducted this morning with the director of Hanganeni, which deals with the artisanal, fishing. So he actually even sent us a detailed email giving an outline or response to the question that Prof. Elisa has just pointed out. And I think we will be able to share his response after this engagement. There are a number of interesting things that he actually pointed out. Number one, the fact that the nature of the law actually excludes the small-scale fisher communities. And obviously, then we can't talk about the express rights that these people can have when the law itself deliberately excludes this particular category. Then, of course, you have part recognition of small-scale fisher communities in the Inland Fisheries Resources Act. But what is important to note that in as much as it does recognize, especially extending to even the use of traditional fishing gear, subsistence fisheries, shared resources, and also the aspect of traditional authorities, this particular sector does not raise much revenue compared to what you find from the marine resources, which are actually largely the main sector that Namibia focuses upon when it comes to the aspect of commercial fishing. So that's an area that has been challenged by the director of Hanganeni insofar as the participatory role that small-scale fisher communities can play. Now, what points did he raise, particularly that he feels he has problems with? The first thing is that, of course, they have the Artisanal Fishing Association, but that association initially was only started for a particular area, which is Henties Bay. But under the current circumstances, I think there has been a request by government to ensure that Hanganeni expands. Why? For the collaborative purposes, because if the small-scale fisher communities who do not have broader rights are not actually in groups, or they are not collaborating together to actually increase their leverage, then of course they will not benefit much. So that's his first area of concern, that there is a minimal recognition of the rights of the small-scale fisher community. And then also he points to the limitations in the type of fish. I think they only have about 300 metric tons of a hake quota that they are given annually. And of course, there is an additional part where they have to trade in fish such as cob and amongst other types of fish. So he feels like if the government can give a broader recognition, and this only can happen at the point when the current exercise that is trying to define what small-scale fisheries are in the context of Namibia and to what extent they can be recognized would be completed, then that would be beneficial. Then, of course, he also points to the fact that, like I have just indicated, the lack of legal framework recognizing and supporting the small-scale fishing in Namibia is evident, hence the marginalized communities living along the coast. He gave an express reference, particularly of the Topna. But what one needs to observe with the Topna is that there is an interesting aspect here. They are almost like an admixture of an inland fishing community together with a coastal fishing community, because they are actually situated along a river, but at the same time, they are close to a coastal area. So why they have not benefited either way, especially from inland fisheries activities, which I think recognize more customary communities, is a bit of a question. And I think that's something that we would want to explore and understand what exactly is implicit. If perhaps the challenges around coastal fishing were much higher because of the role that commercialization plays, perhaps they could have fallen back to inland fishing. But there is no express explanation, and Mr. Oneb himself did not have an answer to that particular issue. And then, of course...
Sorry, Tapio, I think we might have to leave some space for the other two speakers. They haven't
okay, it's fine.
Yet.
No
but thank
problem.
you so much. There was
All
really,
right,
yeah, really important elements that you added to Circa's account and really gave us a very distinctive picture of the situation in Namibia, and particularly for the Topnars people.
Okay.
So thank you so much for that. And please do add additional information if you wish, or contact in the chat if colleagues on the call would like to hear more about what you presented, and the things, unfortunately, I have to cut you off. But otherwise, since I'm aware of the time, I would suggest that we continue the call for just 10 more minutes, so that we can give a chance to our colleagues from UNEP and FAO to reflect with us on a point that has come up multiple times in the presentations, and particularly the role of human rights and the human rights-based approach to address the challenges faced by small-scale fishers and support them in playing their role as ocean defenders. And so we kindly ask Nicole from FAO to take the floor and share her views about how a human rights-based approach can really transform the paradigm in fisheries governance globally, and maybe also help us address the tensions that have been mentioned by colleagues in all the three countries between small-scale fisheries and large-scale fisheries.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elisa, and thank you to all the speakers for these excellent presentations and the sharing of this very, very valuable information from what is really happening at the level of the countries. FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, operates at all levels, at the national level, at the regional level, and at the global level. And some of you may have heard that in 2014, the Committee on Fisheries of the FAO approved the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries, which are grounded in a human rights-based approach. So that was really the first time that this human rights-based approach has really been acknowledged in a fisheries instrument. So even if it's voluntary guidelines, they have been produced through a very participatory process, and that makes them quite a powerful tool. So said that, this just adds, as was already mentioned in the very first presentation, one more instrument that sets on paper the framework. But obviously, as we can see from the different experiences here, the challenge lies in applying this and changing the reality. And there were a lot of very valuable findings in the presentations that I can only echo. And I just want to point out a few that maybe we need to continue to work on in order to use a human rights-based approach for a paradigm shift at all levels. Human rights are fairly complex. And those that we work with, for example, also in FAO in terms of fisheries management, are often not very aware of this. So I think it remains fundamentally important to share information about what the human rights-based approach is and how it can be operating at the national level. What does it mean to give the rights and to realize the human rights of fishing communities? And how does that translate into better resource management, for example? So what the One Ocean Hub is doing in terms of providing this evidence by working in a participatory manner in generating this research, I think this is something that is really needed. So that is something we need to continue to do. We need to not only identify the challenges, but we need to show what can be done and what the benefits are of applying a human rights-based approach, for example, in terms of better sustainable management. So those are really important points that we need to work much more on. I think we need to help understand how to apply the approach. And I just want to briefly mention, because I know we're short on time, that in next year, we're going to celebrate the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. And that's an opportunity for all of us to really take all of that knowledge, to empower the small-scale fishing communities themselves. And I'm really appreciating that we have Soline and Norton here to speak for themselves, to really bring the voice into those decision-making for us. So for next year, when the world's attention is on small-scale fisheries and aquaculture, that's really up to us to make good use of that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And indeed, we hope that with this event, we're really paving the way for identifying the contributions we can make to the International Year of Artisanal Fishers, and hopefully people on the call may want to join efforts with us and contribute to share, as you said, what we're learning on the ground and share it across countries. Unfortunately, I have apologies from our colleague Angela from UNEP. She had another call that she was chairing at this point, so she's not able to come in with the question that we had in mind, but just maybe for me to say that one of the reasons why UNEP was involved in this call is that, of course, they're coordinating international and regional consultations on environmental human rights defenders. And one of the points that our colleagues on the call and the One Ocean Hub more broadly have been exploring with the UN is how understanding that we have ocean defenders who are often not seen as centrally, perhaps as land defenders in that context, and the role of small-scale fishers as environmental human rights defenders. And more broadly, exploring with UNEP and FAO and other UN bodies as part of the preparations for the International Year of Small-Scale Fisheries, but also the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration and the Decade of Ocean Science, how we can address the needs of small-scale fishers and use human rights to really understand the connection of all those needs, the recognition in international law, and through that lens, identify shortcomings in national frameworks, be that at the national level, be in the terms of how co-management is offered or not to small-scale fishers, and how also we can integrate effectively the knowledge of small-scale fishers into assessments and decisions on fisheries. So I realize we have run out of time. There were a couple of questions in the chat, and of course you have the details of the One Ocean Hub. So we hope that if you've had benefited from our presentations, please do stay in touch. We will send a message after this event to make sure that if there were additional questions, but also opportunities for collaborations, you will be able to stay in touch with us. And otherwise, we'll share our research as it becomes available as much as possible, and hope to hear from others interested in these topics, whether our work can be helpful elsewhere, whether your own research may be helpful to us, and we can connect efforts there. So without further ado, I just would like to thank so much all the other panelists. Maybe if you want to switch on your videos just to wave goodbye to participants. I'm sorry we didn't have quite time for a plenary discussion, but the two questions in the chat were really great. And hopefully this is the first of many opportunities we'll have to be in contact with you as we work towards the International Year of Small-Scale Fisheries and Artisanal Fisheries. So thank you very much again, and please stay in touch.